few more people joining us in a few minutes, but it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Professor Glen Bates. Glen has over 35 years of experience as an academic and has a background in clinical and counseling psychology. He has recently returned to the psychological department after 6 years secondment to the role of Pro-Vice Chancellor Student Engagement at Swinburne University. As a member of university's senior executive, Glen was involved in developing strategic approaches to enriching the student experience and supporting students' academic, personal, and professional development. He is particularly interested in mental health and well-being of students in higher education. Glen has taught psychology in undergraduate and undergraduate and postgraduate students in Australia and internationally, and has supervised over 50 doctoral students. He has also worked with international partners to deliver postgraduate training in professional counseling in Singapore. Glen's research focuses on anxiety disorders, especially social anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and post-traumatic growth, as well as narrative models of personality. A lot of new words. Glen is registered psychologist with endorsement in clinical and counseling psychology. He has been a member of the Australian Psychological Society since 1985 and is a member of the clinical and counseling colleges. Welcome, Glen.
Thanks, Elena. I'll have to shorten that talk a bit. It makes me sound like I'm about 200, but still a young fellow making his way in the world, so keen to talk. But yeah, I have been interested in wellbeing, and I did spend a lot of those last 6 years working with Elena's team and developing Elena's team alongside a careers group and academic support. So I guess I brought a psychological approach to that. And I think we did some really good work in promoting how our student services connect to students. I've changed the initial title just a little bit to focus it a bit more on what I thought I'd like to talk about, and I thought might be useful to talk about, and also some things that we've just been doing in a recent paper, particularly looking at belonging and help-seeking behaviour, which I think is really important to the sort of work that we do in student support and student advising. So I want to talk a bit about that. Now I'll just share the screen and hopefully we'll. Right, now you should have a lovely full screen picture of the slides. I'll make these slides available to Steve and Elena later, so you'll have a recording of them, but you know, if anything is on there, you don't feel you have to write it down now and go on. So I want to talk about student wellbeing and why I think it's important, and connecting that to the motivation of students. And I want to put that in the context of university learning and self-directed learning, which universities make an assumption, I think, when students come, that they're able to do that. And as we know, many students really struggle with that sort of process. So working at how self-directed learning and what contributes to students becoming more proficient in that model of learning is important. And I'm particularly interested in the notion of student belonging, which has got an increasing sort of interest across, it's been around for a fair while, but interest across the field in terms of how we understand effective student connection with the university, and then what actually helps help-seeking behaviour. How do they become comfortable with seeking help? Could be in academic literacy, but in any part of the university. So why wellbeing matters, I think, is sort of illustrated by this slide, which is based on it's a thing called the Temperament Project, and it looks at a number of factors in people's development across their lives. It began in the 1980s, and we're now, so people in that study are now into their 50s. And a couple of things I think is interesting to note about this is mental stress or psychological stress, when people are likely to have mental health problems or behavioural problems, and there's 4 spikes across the lifespan. they correspond to educational expectations. First one is kinder into primary school. Kids will have much more difficulty adapting to the greater autonomy required there. Second spike is when we go into secondary school. But a third spike, and one where we're expecting more distress, less well-being, more mental health problems, is at the start of university and across the university span for most younger people, 18 to 25. The other thing to keep in mind is why well-being is important is also that major mental disorders, this is a period of life when they appear. So people develop schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders often come earlier, but around this time we're more likely to see those stresses, and it's a period of identity development. So basically the norm is for people to have a degree of issue in terms of looking at who they are and how they manage their lives. Our next one is with our mature age students, we used to call the midlife crisis, that adaptation later in your career when you might change your education. If you get into your 50s, it seems to be stress drops off. So there's one benefit of aging, if you can see that there. Okay, so well-being is going to be an issue. In university students, we actually don't see any more mental health or well-being concerns than we would see in people in that outside of university. So this is a normative process. It's a difficulty for us in the university sector. We're getting more mental health conditions, but it's not one that's separate or relevant only to us. So some work we did a little while ago saying, well, where is this? As self-directed learning is about where you set your learning goals, you direct study and so on. You work out ways of study much more independently, and that's our goal for university study. It's the sort of issue we deal with. We then look at the sort of issues that students have, and if you look at each of those pieces of the pie, about 75% is to do with academic skills and academic literacy issues. The majority of things that students have in coming to university, adjusting to university, is to do with their study habits. The learning style required, how they study, difficulty of the work they encounter. We certainly other areas of health and so on, but the focus is around their academic work, which makes academic literacy a really crucial sort of group of people in the university. Now, alongside that, for almost 20 or 30 years, Tinto was one of the big writers here, writing from the 80s, and others have emphasised that in adjusting to this stress that comes particularly in the first year, but across the whole period of the student's time with us, is the need to understand the sense of belonging in students. I'll come to talk a bit more what we mean by belonging, but adjusting to university is best done by having a sense of belonging to this institution. And belonging, and I'll talk about in a moment, is a more complex factor in university than perhaps in secondary school before. So belonging has become important to the universities, mainly because it certainly is a major source of attrition, a reason why we lose the students, undergraduate and postgraduate. And it's very much connected to students' satisfaction with their courses at the end, whether they feel they've got what they wanted from the course, and also if there's a lack of a sense of belonging, we see more issues, mental health issues or just broad wellbeing issues. So it's been an important construct for us to take into account when we're working with students. Look at what belonging is. It's Baumeister and Leary is the article that you'll see most frequently connected with that, and they worked on the need for safety and security before you could self-actualise, and they identified belonging or social connection with others as a crucial need of humans. And so we're sort of driven to get to at least a minimum quantity of positive and significant relationships with others. We vary, it's an individual difference, so not everyone needs to have a heap of belonging. It's on a continuum, some people need less than others, but all of us need some direction or connection with others in the organisation that we're with, the university, and in our learning to actually feel well-being, that they're developing as an individual, feeling life satisfaction. So I said a little while ago, when we're thinking about belonging in universities, it's a bit broader than it is when we're talking about, say, secondary school. And in the work that we've done and others, such as Slayton, sort of come up with 3, and now I'm going to add 4 in a moment, there's another dimension, that the construct is social relationships. So that's definitely through friendships, clubs, connections to other students. Those sorts of things are important. One, and that's very much built around the idea of safety, comfort of being on campus, being part of the place. And the third element that Slayton talked about is identifying with the university. And this is that you feel proud to be a student at that university, that you feel respected by the university, or there's a sense of holding the values of your university. All of those factors seem to be very important in terms of how much you have a feeling of belonging. Now, one other piece of data, and don't worry too much about the statistics here, there's only a couple of points I want to make from this, is to say what we looked at was the impact on students' course satisfaction. So these are the ones who stay with us, finish their course. We were interested in the impact of negative factors that disrupt all people's education. And they're on the left, so that's to do with health and stress, having to work, financial problems, difficulties of their workload, wanting a break, study fatigue, I guess, study life balance. Right? They're classic negative impacts on study, and they certainly will reduce course satisfaction. However, what we found in a measure of belonging is that the higher the level of belonging determines whether they will actually reduce your satisfaction with your studies. So what we're saying is that if you have a higher level of sense of belonging, either to the social part of university life, feeling safe on campus, having an identity, you connect to the university, if that's high, that will reduce the impact, or that will completely reduce the impact, if you like, on course satisfaction. It determines whether course satisfaction is disrupted or not. Students who don't have a sense of belonging, if that's weak, these things will have much more impact on their satisfaction. Okay, so belonging seems to be a core mediator or a determinant of what happens in your life and whether it affects your studies. And I want to talk a little bit more on well-being, because this study just published is added well-being as attention. So I talked about the idea of identifying with the university and being connected to it. This work by Arne and Davis suggested that actually students themselves identified their sense of well-being as being a fourth element that determined their belonging to the university. And if we think broadly about well-being, subjective well-being is short-term and hedonistic, and this is like life's generally going well for me, positive feelings, negative feelings, very short-term. What seems to be more important is what we're calling eudaimonic well-being. I've put a picture of Aristotle there because I've always wanted to have a picture of Aristotle in one of my talks. And he came up with the idea of eudaimonic well-being as not so much being happy with the world, but actually having a sense of purpose on a path to fulfillment and a pursuit of long-term goals. And what he was saying was part of this psychological well-being is those 6 dimensions, which are currently measured by Carol Riff's come up with scales to measure that. And you'll see purpose in life, autonomy, self-acceptance, positive relationships with others. So eudaimonic well-being is having a sense that my life is working towards my goals, I'm fulfilling who I am. And that seems to be the core of what we're looking for in terms of establishing belonging and students adapting more to their studies. And the key element that this bit of research we've just started focusing on is going back to help-seeking behaviour. Frequently at conferences, we say, well, what we need is to promote help-seeking amongst the students. How do we do that? It's actually not often talked about too much. I wanted to make that a bit of a focus for later, because help-seeking, I'll show, is connected to belonging. It's driven by belonging, actually. but it's also an adaptive strategy, and it fits with this idea of a self-regulated learner. So if we define a self-regulated learner as someone who's able to set their own learning goals, work out their own sort of ways of adapting to situations, maintaining motivation, and so it's got a cognitive, social, and behavioural sort of factor. If you're an effective self-regulated learner, you will be able to seek out help when you need it. And so when we look at the actual process of help seeking, it's quite complex. It requires a lot of forethought to recognise the need, and also the competency to actually ask for help. So these are the people who come to us or go to the academics or whoever is there. It's a complex process of getting them there. And these decisions of deciding to seek help, deciding from whom to seek help, and deciding what form of help I might need. What we find is belonging, from those 4 elements of belonging, has a really powerful influence on that initial decision to seek help and to seek out help. The other side, and this is a quote that I don't think will come as any surprise to anyone, is that the students with help are the ones that are least likely to seek help. But perhaps is ones we actually need most to come and see us, to take advantage of advising or to attend our workshops, are the hardest ones to get in the room. And why is that? Why is help-seeking behaviour so difficult for them? And in fact, when you look at help-seeking behaviour, it's the ones who need it most who don't come. There is a group at the other end of the spectrum who are very skilled, independent workers who don't actually need help. But the large group in between are ones that we perhaps could benefit more from what we do and don't get there. If you look at why students don't look for help, there's actually a whole lot of overlap with mental health and academic problems. So from a couple of years ago, if you look at mental health, usually they are not sure that they've got a problem or that the symptoms they're having. People aren't very good at identifying, I've got chronic worry condition, I've got anxiety, I've got depression. They might say that other people are much worse than me, or my symptoms are not that bad. And I think there's a sense with academic problems too, that I actually don't, my problems are trivial compared to other people, is one that I commonly get when students come in to ask, if I get them in to ask a question. And there's a whole lot of stigma about approaching help. So mental health, afraid, anxious, embarrassed, ashamed, what will people think if I come in for help? Similarly, when we're looking at academic problems in that second group, people can have a negative attitude to help seeking, feel it reflects a personal failure, if you like, or that it's embarrassing when they're inadequate. So unsure of the need for help, negative attitudes are common to both mental health concerns and academic problems. And then we have the unsure about what sort of help they might need, and unsure where to go for help as being our last 2 elements. So mental health and academic seem to have the same reasons that people don't go. Where we can influence that by this sense of belonging or purpose that people have tends to be more at the initial decision. And in dealing with these attitudes, being afraid or anxious or embarrassed, or being having a negative attitude to help, reflecting badly on myself. Belonging and the idea of belonging is the factors associated with belonging, I should say, are the ones that will help us overcome that barrier. So if students feel part of the university, they're going to be better able to deal with that stigma of coming to see us. Now, what we have just done is we came up with a measure which was of comfort in help seeking, and we just simply asked several hundred students, 1,000 of them now, looking across the university in terms of how comfortable they felt in approaching academics, and also how comfortable they felt in approaching professional staff for help. And we identified with mental personal problems, we called them, or with academic problems. Now, one thing I did look at whether there was a difference between professional staff or academic staff, and there isn't any difference in the associations we get to belonging. So students in our sample, which is a big sample, tend to have the same issues to do with approaching academics as they might approaching what we call professional staff. And we found quite a strong series of associations. So if you felt more comfort seeking on the one panel here, we find that it's quite a strong connection to belonging. Psychological well-being, which is that meaning in life, purpose in life, self-acceptance, environmental mastery, those sorts of things that and Aristotle came up with, as well as subjective well-being. So feeling good about self, having less negative emotion, and a strong connection to intrinsic motivation to study. But the things that people would be more comfortable approaching are very much predicted by these factors. So we've got a significant prediction, and the ones that are most important in that part of it are belonging, psychological well-being, and intrinsic motivation. Subjective well-being is not as important. So again, connecting with our stuff. On the other side of it, the things that prevent you, the negative correlations, so you're less likely to feel comfortable with this. Sleep and worry were the main predictors here. So we looked at loneliness, we looked at depression. They're correlated, but they're not big predictors. The actual things that add something as being socially anxious, which is probably that element of approaching people, which you feel being able to ask the question, getting anxiety when you're approaching people. And worry or chronic concerns about whether you're doing well enough, how you're going to go, a bit of a generalised anxiety sort of aspect is also important. So if you put those 6 factors together, you predict quite a lot of the variance, if you like, in comfort seeking. So if we can increase people's belonging, we will increase their help-seeking behaviour, and help-seeking behaviour is what's going to establish them as self-directed learning. They're the ones that will come to see us. So the question is, okay, these are broad ideas. Help-seeking behaviour, or help-seeking behaviour is that it's very well established that you do better academically if you seek help. So students who seek help with their studies do better. Anyone who engages with help services will do better academically. Belonging is something that we develop from your overall connection with the university. How does that develop is the question. It's sort of an abstract idea. It sort of makes good intuitive sense that, you know, if I feel like I belong more, I'm going to do better. I'm going to go. Where does that come from? And in what we've done, and, you know, comments, I'll be interested in what people might think about that. It does come very much from their interactions with the universities. So when people are actually on campus, in classes, or virtually on campus, as we now in the new COVID environment, where everyone's doing it by Zoom or distance, but when people are engaging with other students and engaging with their studies, that's where they have the strongest impact on belonging. And what we've been doing with Andrew Rixon in our business faculty, looking at the literature on belonging, looking at, well, where does belonging occur in the classroom, and how do we actually maximise that effect? 4 dimensions, and 3 are put in blue, which I think are most relevant to our current purposes. There's the interpersonal dimension, connections with others. For some people, it's the only time in which they have a social engagement with the university. So it's an opportunity to get to know other students, or to feel connection, and to feel connection with the staff. And we've got there about the teacher's behaviour, the teacher's attitude, the person who's running the workshop, social interactions being valued, being promoted, class participation mechanics, giving people a chance to actually engage in some way. And from teaching over the years, and it's harder now because it was a lovely period as academics when we got to have the same group of people for the entire year. So you'd meet them in March and you'd be there in November. And you develop this really good tutorial sort of discussion. But nowadays we break them into different teaching periods and we scramble them around, and it's very hard for us to get this ongoing connection. And also a lot of our staff are casual staff, so the academic staff is separated. So there's a lot of factors that make this difficult. But this is suggesting is that the sense of belonging will come from in those formal interactions of whatever type that we might be offering to people. Second one is the environmental dimension. Seems to be an important characteristic of promoting belonging. How do we use space that we have in a COVID environment? How do we actually use that virtual space that we have? How do we get people to connect, create communities, engage with each other? And I'm hoping it's working for your workshops, but it's certainly working with my graduate students of getting them into these little breakout groups and coming back together and having ongoing sort of connections where it's working as well as in the classroom for many students, not everybody, but for most students. Allowing some proximity to the academic staff or to whoever's running the unit. This was designed for academics, but I think it's more general. And how we might use virtual space. How do we work together? Third element seems to be what do you do and when. So the idea of how do we, the transition period, first weeks, we've known for a long time that's a crucial time in forming connection with students. And that's one of the reasons we had our strategies to success week developed at Swinburne to try to get people engaging with other students early on, engaging with their peers. But at different years, you need re-engagement, you need different sorts of things. So another aspect is what do you time and when do you do these things? And the last one is building things into the curriculum, how we assess people, implementing interventions, active learning, ways in which we can form some sort of action. And remember, with belonging, it's not just about making friends, or trying to emphasise, it's also to do with feeling respected by the university communicating values, that sort of, so you can identify as a university, a student from that university, and the sense of having a purpose to your studies. So we actually give opportunity to develop a purpose, and the safety of how you interact with everyone, connection, which is more like the environmental. Okay, so that's, as we've been playing with, my key element is that if we expand or increase this notion of sense of belonging to the university, belonging to the connecting to the university, and with help-seeking behaviour, we will have a reciprocal relationship and will be more effective in terms of students doing well and being more satisfied, what the sort of studies suggest. So my time is about up. So what I would be interested in seeing what comes out of a discussion is belonging is a broad construct. I don't think we would argue with it, and we see evidence of it in students. How do we foster it? That last slide was a bit about ideas, but it's actually been done very intuitively. So how do we foster it? And you're probably doing it. You're probably with the context you have with students, you'll have your own strategy. So interested in what you see as what we're currently doing that fosters this sort of idea. We've put it together under the notion of belonging. What do you actually find you do in your work in supporting students that actually promotes that? Then what role do we play in helping academics to do this? How do we actually work in classes or across curriculum development? What sort of role might we have that addresses these sort of questions? And the other two on help seeking is, how do we encourage it? How do we encourage help seeking with working with students? If students are not sure how to define what they need help with, if they feel some sort of degree of stigma about it, what are things that we can do to encourage that? And again, promoting help-seeking related to self-directed learning. So they were a few topics that I'd be interested in the input from you people about. I think I've managed to do it in the 25 minutes that I was to talk to. So I'll stop there and either take a question or